So it's the year 483. And I want to try to orient you in comparison to where we've been. Does anyone remember around what year we were at the end of Nehemiah last week? Numbers are hard to... What's that? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. We were around 433, 432. It could have been a little later than that. We don't really know for sure. But somewhere 433, 432 and after. Now we're backing up about 50 years. So some of these books cover like periods of time, and some of them work together better with others. And so we do have to kind of, if we're looking at the post-exilic period, that is after the exile, we do have to jump around just a little bit time-wise. And we're jumping around just a little bit place-wise too. Now, if we're in around 483, you might remember just a little bit of this timeline, that about 100 years earlier was the exile. Now, that basically was just, Babylon came in, they conquered Judah and Jerusalem and destroyed Jerusalem and displaced the kings, took them into slavery, took the people into slavery. And then around 538, the Persians came in, the Persians took over, they conquered Babylon. They set the peoples free so the people could go back to their homelands. Around 537, the people return and start to lay the foundation of the temple, and then it's finished around 515, March of 515. So that kind of like orients us where we are a little bit. But now, again, we're in the post-exilic, after the exile, after the people return from the exile. So there's the pre-exilic prophets, that's before the exile. Then there's the exilic, that is during the exile. Now we're after the exile. So a lot of the Jews had returned home. 537 would be the date, the year when they started to come back. A lot of those Jews have returned home, and things are going pretty well in Jerusalem as far as getting the temple rebuilt and stuff like that. But there are still a lot of Jews who are living in exile, and they haven't come back. And they're living in places like Babylon, and you might have heard the town Ecbatana and Susa. And one of these Jews is a woman named Esther, and she's a common person who's living in Susa. And Susa is way over, maybe if the Mediterranean Sea is here, and Israel is here, and you see the Arabian Desert, and modern-day Iraq. Susa is way over by the Persian Gulf. And you might remember an incident we had a couple decades ago, the Gulf War. And you might remember that started when really Iraq kind of invaded Kuwait and all that stuff. And we went over there and kind of took care of some things. Well, Susa is only about 100 miles away from the Persian Gulf. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But the king of Persia is a guy named Ahasuerus, and he has a royal palace in Susa. But there's a heavy situation going on in Persia because the Persians, they're about to go to war. Now, we don't read this in the biblical account, but they're about to go to war with Greece. And so the king of Persia is trying to garner support. He's trying to gather up support to go to war. He's trying to gather up his allies to go to war. And he hosts these parties to gain the support that he needs. As Esther chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia, we'll talk about that in a second, over 127 provinces, so we already know right off the bat, there's a big territory here. In those days, as King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa, we already talked about the fact that they're in Susa. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So we're seeing some of his territory. We're seeing where he is, We're even seeing when this happens in verse 3, which we'll talk about again in a sec. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his princes and attendants, the army officers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of his provinces being in his presence, and he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days. So Ahasuerus is the king of Persia, and it's a major empire. And if we were to look at these ancient empires against the modern map, so we look at this against the ancient map, and we could see, pretty much all this area. This area is covered by the Persian Empire. Now they may not really enjoy much land in the Arabian desert, but that really wasn't worth getting anyway. Like really nobody but, desert peoples lived in there anyway, because nobody but desert peoples could live in there. There was really no point in even owning that territory. You couldn't really move armies through, so the fact that they don't own this area means very little at this point. But everything that matters in the ancient Near Eastern world, they pretty much own, and they pretty much conquered. Now, if you look at it against a modern map, now this gets a little confusing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, this pink line, and I'm going to outline that pink line like this, so you can kind of see what's going on. And we have this. So all this land is under the Persian Empire. And if you look at it against modern countries, over here in the West, Bulgaria, they own parts of Bulgaria. They have parts of Greece. They have parts of Egypt, parts of Turkey, in the Middle East, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel. It says West Bank here. I don't really know what that's all about, but let's just, what's that? No, what I'm saying is I'm not sure why West Bank is being called a country here, but it wouldn't be on my list of countries, West Bank. It's a territory within Israel. But you'll see Jordan, they control parts of Jordan. As you move over towards the Persian Gulf, they control parts of Iran and Iraq. And look at some of these countries up in here, up towards the Black and Caspian Seas. They control territory, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan. Basically, there's a major area of land. What were you going to say?
Georgia and Ukraine are on that map. They don't control it, but they're close.
It's pretty close to. Georgia. It's pretty close to the.
Tbilisi, isn't it, according to that?
Yeah. So I guess the Georgia's in there. So. Azerbaijan, there's all types of, this is a major territory that King Ahasuerus rules. They call it 127 provinces. Well, in today's map, I don't know how many nations we mentioned there, but it sounds like a good 10 to 15 countries. I didn't go and count them, but you could count them if you want later on. I could send you the map. But anyway, he's got a massive amount of territory, and he's 32 years old at the time when he becomes king in 5. Now, ignore all this other stuff, just the yellow. Ahasuerus is 32 years old when he becomes king in 486, but the passage says we're in his 3rd year, so that's where we're coming up with this number. So we're coming up with this number 483 based on when Ahasuerus becomes the king. Well, anyway, he's on his royal throne in Susa, and again, Susa is right here, kind of right in the middle of this map where I have it about 100 miles away from the Persian Gulf. And there are a couple of different capital cities in Persia. So one of those capital cities is Babylon. You have heard of Babylon. One of them is Ecbatana. You will hear of Ecbatana if you haven't already. And one of them is Persepolis. Well, Susa is right smack dab in the middle, about 250 miles away from each one of those places. Now that's like maybe a casual 10-day trip in the ancient world. If you're going about 20 25 miles a day. They go between 17 and 23 miles. You could probably go a little faster depending on how many people are going. You're talking about a 10-day trip. And so Susa is kind of like centrally located to the capital cities of Persia at that time, but it's also really good for a winter palace. Now, it's not good in the summer. It's not good in the summer. Someone wrote, some ancient writer said this, that snakes or lizards trying to cross the street at noon would be fried to death before they could cross. That's how hot they say it was in Susa. It kind of reminds me of South Florida in the summer. It's so hot. You go down towards like Miami or down like Key West, you cannot walk across that sand. I mean, sometimes it's hot up here on the sand if you go to the beach, but you go down there and you're trying to walk across that sand. You might start running until you could find like an umbrella to get your feet under for a few seconds. And you're like, ah! If you don't wear sandals, you're going to be wearing sandals. It's so hot you can't even walk across. You could take an egg in South Florida. I imagine, I've never done it because I care about the paint of my vehicles. But you could take an egg and probably fry it on the roof of your car in South Florida in the summer. So, Susa is not really the best place to be in the summer in the ancient world where there's no electricity and air conditioning. We're spoiled. It's like, man, when my house hits 75, 76, I'm like, can someone check that someone's walking by? Hey, can you check the thermostat? How hot is the house right now? I know it. Once it hits 75, 76 degrees, I know. And then I'm like, can you just hit the air conditioner? We have a little floor unit to start cooling things down. Once it gets down around 72, 73, then I could turn it off a little bit. But 75, 76. Try to imagine being in let's say, Miami in July with no air conditioning. It's not the most pleasant place. Well, Susa is kind of like the same situation. Not comfortable in the summer, but perfect for the winter because in January, the average temperature of this place is like 65 degrees. So 65 is pretty good. You don't really need heat at 65. You don't really need air conditioning at 65. It's a nice place to spend the winter, and that's exactly what they're doing. They spend the winters, the kings are spending the winters in Susa. Again, it's the third year of his reign, so we're talking about 483. And again, Persia is about to go to war with Greece. And if you kind of look over at the western edge of their empire, borders with Greece. This is Greece. If you look at the modern countries, we would have the western edge being here, actually having a portion of the territory of modern-day Greece. So he wants to invade Greece. He wants to invade Athens for whatever reason. And for what reason, I don't know, but I can only imagine a lot of these ancient kings, this guy's 32 years old, he's got power over all this land. I want more. I want to make a name for myself. I want a legacy of owning all this stuff. I want everything under my authority. And that's pretty common in the ancient world. Imperialism was pretty common. And so he spends, in this passage, 6 months, 180 days. He spends 6 months gathering up support from his army officers and his nobles and his princes and displaying his wealth and his authority. And I think of this kind of like an ancient presidential campaign or like an ancient Trump rally, where he brings in all these people and goes on for 6 months. We're going to take Greece. We're going to win. We're going to do something that you're going to be sick of winning and you're going to say, stop, we can't handle any more winning. I could just imagine Ahasuerus as an ancient like Trump, right? We're going to make Greece great again. I could imagine a 6-month period where he's pulling these people in and he's kind of trying to gather up support. But at the end of the 6 months, he throws a final week-long festival in verse 5. When these days were verses 5 and 6. When these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days. So there's 180 days of banquets, and then there's a 7-day banquet for all the people who were present at the citadel in Susa. This is for all the people of the winter capital city. From the greatest to the least. This is for all people, and it's a public festival for everyone. It doesn't matter what your social class is. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. From the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. It doesn't matter what your social class is. It's open for everyone in the city. There were hangings of fine white and violet linen, held by cords of fine purple linen, on silver rings and marble columns and couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. So you have this royal banquet that's taking place in the garden. It'd be like the president inviting you into the White House. Everybody's welcome into the White House grounds, and we're going to have this fest. And you know, they have these mosaics on the ground at Susa, and these magnificent gardens and exotic plants and flowers, like the Jerusalem tulip, I hear, one of the most beautiful and rare flowers in the world, also known as the Jerusalus, from the Jerusalus tulipesius genus. But I don't know anything about flowers. But they have these flowers, and they have these hangings, and they have these couches, and it's an extravagant tapestries. It's an extravagant celebration. And I picture, because I'm a little bit of I don't really, the superhero movies, they drive me crazy because they're just not well written anymore. But it reminds me of if Bruce Wayne were to throw a party for Gotham. You know, and you know who I'm talking about? The guy the Batman. He's like rich. Bruce Wayne is rich. I don't know if he's rich in all the movies. I think at some point he loses everything. I don't remember. But if Bruce Wayne, who's rich, throws a party for Gotham and everyone comes, and he's got all this rich stuff all over the place, it kind of reminds, or you could just say if Donald Trump invited everyone to Trump Tower. Now, that doesn't work in today's context because, you know, New York City would trash it because they hate Trump. But there was a day when Trump might open up Trump Towers and people would be, you know, just for a party, and people would be like, wow, look at this, or whatever else. You could imagine something like that. But this feast is meant to garner the support of the people of Susa. For 180 days, he's gathering the support of the people of the provinces and of the armies and all this stuff, and getting them riled up for this war that he's going to go and he's going to invade. He wants to invade Athens. He wants to control Greece. And now for a week, he's gathering up support for the people of Susa itself. Persia is about to take down Greece. Not. It doesn't tell us, you know, the scripture doesn't tell us all this, but what ends up happening is Greece ends up winning. Persia loses, and that kind of sets the stage for some other events that happen a little bit. But anyway, King Ahasuerus and his people, they party in verses 7 and 8. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful according to the king's bounty. The drinking was done according to the law. There was no compulsion, for so the king had given orders to each official and his household that he should do according to the desires of each person. So basically what you have here is it's a party, and drinking is available. It's like an open bar party. Now, the Persians think differently about drinking than we do. Now, our culture understands that drinking alcohol, don't get me wrong, people do it. You turn on a television set, half those commercials are probably beer. I don't know if there's still beer commercials, but I think there used to be a lot of beer commercials. And there are bars and all this stuff. People do it. But people also understand that it's something of a vice. People also understand how it negatively impairs your judgment and that type of stuff. A lot of stupid stuff happens when people drink. But the Persians, they think about it differently. Now, we have scripture passages. I'll just read a few of them. Wine is a mocker, Proverbs 20, verse 1. Strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is unwise. Probably a lot of you people have memorized a verse like that. Over in Proverbs 31:4, it is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to desire strong drink, for they will drink and forget what is decreed and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. So they'll make poor judgments. This is Scripture. Scripture makes this clear. Over in Isaiah 5:11, woe to those who rise early in the morning that they may pursue strong drink, who stay up late in the evening that wine may inflame them. I mean, we could go passage after passage and see this. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaining? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long over wine. Those who go to taste mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. At the last, it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, and your mind will utter perverse things, and you will be like one who lies down in the middle of the sea, or like one who lies down on the top of a mast. They struck me, but I did not become ill. They beat me, but I did not know it. When shall I awake? I will seek another drink. They're making fun of it, making fun of drunkards. And look at these fools. It's foolishness. The warnings of Scripture are clear, and modern society understands this to a certain extent about how things can be impaired and the horrible decisions, and sometimes the drunk drivers have killed people. And you know what I tend to find? So many times those drunk drivers make it. They survive. They get drunk, they go out and drive, they kill somebody, and they make it. And in my mind, I would not have a problem with the death penalty. I really wouldn't. I don't have a problem with death penalty. I mean, the death penalty's in Scripture pretty clearly, but they're operating a motor vehicle, understanding at this point in history, knowing how dangerous it is, knowing that their ability to safely handle a vehicle has been greatly diminished. So our society understands some of the negatives of alcohol. But the Persians have a different view. The Persians believe, whereas we believe that judgment, and we understand, it's not belief, it's understanding. We understand that judgment is impaired. Some of these drunkards are like, I fight better when I'm drunk. I make better decisions when I'm drunk. I play sports better when I'm drunk. Well, no, they definitely don't. We understand that judgment is impaired. The Persians believe that as they're drinking, their judgment is enhanced. They believe that the more they drink, the closer they get to the gods, and their judgment is enhanced. And so they think it makes them make better decisions. And the royal palace has wine. It's not so common among the people, at least not this wine. And during the festival, that royal wine is made available, and everyone seems to have access to it. And since the Persians think that alcohol enhances judgment, they would sometimes, according to Josephus, force people to drink more. But in this case, everything is voluntary, so there was no compulsion. People can drink as much or as little as they wanted. But the mindset is, the more you drink, the better judgment you're going to make. You're getting closer to the gods. It's wild to imagine that people could think that. It seems like absolute common sense that anyone can figure out pretty quickly that alcohol kind of messes with your judgment. Now, why might you think alcohol messes with your judgment? Anyone who maybe got saved later in life. I know how I know alcohol messes with my judgment. Because when you were lost, if you drank alcohol, you did stupid things. And then later on, you'd be like, oh man, that was really stupid. I wish I didn't do that. I can't believe I did that. People saw me do those stupid things. That was really stupid. It's kind of common sense, but our world today doesn't really know what common sense is, so that's another thing. But anyway, the king hosts an extravagant feast in the capital city of Susa, and the queen hosts her own banquet. Verse 9, Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So she hosts a ladies' banquet. I don't know what that is. I'm sure it's not like the king's drinking party. I imagine like a tea party. I don't know. I imagine that's something that ladies would have liked to do. I imagine it's considerably more laid back than King Ahasuerus' drinking party. At least I would hope that it's more laid back. Now, we don't know a whole lot about Queen Vashti. We know that she's the queen, and we know that she's beautiful, or at least the passage suggests that she's beautiful. The king thinks she's beautiful. I'd have to imagine she wasn't ugly, because in the ancient world, the kings would have harems of women. They would have all types of women that they could do with as they please, and the one that pleased them the most, they would take out of the harem and make like the queen. And so I imagine, she wasn't an ugly girl. I imagine, knowing that he had the pick of the litter, that, he picked somebody, half decent at least, someone who pleased him the most. So it seems, based on what we understand about the ancient world and what we see through the rest of this book, it seems that she's a beauty queen. All the men want to be with her. All the women want to be her. In the 21st century, half the men would want to be her, and half the women would want to be with her. I don't know. I don't know what the statistics are, but they're getting kind of ridiculous. She's a model for the women of Susa, but for Ahasuerus, what is she? What's that? Trophy. She is the Larry O'Brien trophy. She is the NBA Finals championship trophy. She's a trophy. That's what she is. A trophy of his power and glory, a trophy to be displayed. But the queen doesn't see herself that way. She does not see herself as a trophy. And this is going to cause a problem between her and her husband, and it will pave the path for Esther to enter into the scene, and it will pave the path for Esther to deliver her people. Now, when we interpret Scripture, I always say, and I didn't come up with this myself, this is good Bible interpretation principle, is that context matters more than anything. I mean, if you don't understand the context, you could really twist the Scripture. Maybe the most important part of the hermeneutical process, that is the process of interpreting Scripture, is understanding context. We don't really have a whole lot of time to get into the account itself today, and as I looked at this more like an introduction. And when I look at the introduction, I look more like I want to set the stage. I want to look at the context. And that's what we did, because context, someone said, I don't remember who, context is king. Someone wrote that. Some theologian wrote that. I thought I stole that from Star Trek, but I didn't. And now we understand something about the context. And we understand something about the situation that the Jews are in Susa. We understand that many of those Jews have returned back to Judah. We understand that those Jews have rebuilt the temple. That's huge. We looked at that. We looked at that already. We spent time in books that dealt with the rebuilding of the temple. But while that's going on over in Jerusalem, and that's where we've been, so I've kind of gone through these post-exilic books as far as like territory. I've looked at it as far as where the Jews are and the restoring of Jerusalem. But while that's going on, and before that's going on, these other Jews who haven't gone home, for whatever reason, maybe they didn't have the money, maybe they didn't have the courage, maybe they liked the life that they had where they were. We don't know. But these other Jews are still in exile in other parts of the Persian Empire, and that includes Jews like Esther, and it includes Jews like her uncle Mordecai, who's kind of like a father figure to her. In this passage, we understand something about the king of Persia. Outside of the passage, we know that he's going to war with Greece, and invading Greece is a major task. And so inside the passage, we see that he's garnering as much support as he can possibly gather up. But he's a pagan. Ahasuerus is a pagan. This is not some guy that's a godly person. This is not someone that a godly person would want to be married to. Does that make sense? Like, a godly person should want to be married to another godly person, not a pagan person who throws drinking parties. And by the way, Many men have lost their wives because of drinking. And drinking is a factor in what happens with Ahasuerus and his queen. But we'll look at that next time. So he wants as much support as he can get, but he's a pagan, and he worships false gods, and his false theology leads to wrong choices, and his drinking makes him think he's getting closer to the gods, which is pretty much the opposite of what the case is. Drinking takes you further away from the one true God. It might bring you closer to your false gods, because those false gods are demons, and they want to destroy your life, and alcohol will destroy your life, and alcohol will destroy your marriage, and it'll destroy a whole bunch of things, your liver. So we understand something about King Ahasuerus. We understand something about the Jews who are in Susa, just by means of looking at the situation. We understand something so far. We understand something about Vashti, and we'll understand a lot more about her next time. But what I'm seeing as I look at the first paragraph, I'm seeing the beginnings of themes that are going to run through the book. There's a lot of wrong things that happen in Esther. There's a lot of people who do sinful things throughout the book, even the so-called good guys. Ahasuerus does wrong. We'll see that next week. He's doing wrong this week. Vashti does wrong. We'll see that next time. Esther does wrong. A lot of people argue that Mordecai does wrong. We're going to see, the heroes of the book are even not so great. They're putting themselves in terrible situations that godly people really wouldn't want to put themselves into. And yet, just like Joseph with regard to his brothers, what man meant for evil, God meant for good. And God used things that were even evil to bring about good. And God will work in spite of the evil of all these imperfect people. And he'll deliver his people in spite of all these imperfect people. And he'll deliver his people through imperfect people who make some pretty bad decisions. Some pretty ungodly decisions. Over the next 12 weeks, we're going to see how God works through the events of the book of Esther. And it's not an explicitly stated work of God. That is, God's name is never even mentioned one time in the book. So it's not like God did this explicitly. But the message is still clear. It's still clearly implied that God did this. It's a clearly implied work of God. And we'll realize that God can and does work in spite of and even through sinful people. And that principle remains true even today. When you realize that truth, you also realize that God can work in spite of you, and he can work through you, even if you've made horrible decisions in your life, and even if you made sinful decisions, God can work through you. 12 weeks in Esther. Get ready. We're going to take our hymnals and turn to 637 to close the 10 o'clock hour. 637, if you're not sure you're saved, then you